so I think we're good to get started. My name is Maddy. I'm a principal customer success engineer with Movebot. So I work with our clients providing support around the Movebot tool, as well as working with our partners to ensure success while they're running their migrations.
Great. Yeah, I'm Chris Roy. I'm a solutions architect here. So I do a lot of work on the technical side, helping out our partners, MSPs, and rest of sort of customer success team as well. A lot of y'all may have spent time with me on various calls or in the chats and stuff. So yeah, good to see some familiar faces in here, and looking forward to sharing some useful information, hopefully. Awesome. Then I'm going to kick things off, and I'll just start off here. So for anyone who's maybe not super familiar with Movebot, basically a little bit about who we are. So as I mentioned before, we are a New Zealand-based tech company, and essentially we are a next generation migration tool. So Movebot came about. We actually have another tool, Couchdrop, which is focused on cloud SFTP. And Movebot came about because we had a lot of customers who were coming to our cloud SFTP solution and trying to transfer enormous amounts of data. We had a lot of support for all the various kind of platforms, and so people liked using that to try and use SFTP to perform these migrations. We saw an opportunity there and kind of said, you know what, actually, this is not really ideal. Surely we can come up with something better. And so in around late 2019, 2020, Movebot came about. And so we started out with traditional things, mainly in the cloud-to-cloud space and on-prem to cloud. And nowadays we also do your tenant-to-tenant and email migrations as well. The idea behind Movebot is basically to provide you a simple, efficient tool that you can kind of just pick up and get started with, really filling that need for an easy way to transfer data in the modern age. So today we're going to go over a little bit of the Movebot method. For those that joined last week, you will have seen this at the tail end here of our last presentation. So we have this Movebot method, which we use when we're assisting our customers and if we are ever needing to run migrations ourselves. The Movebot method is broken up into these 3 key steps, and Maddy and I will sort of run through these today and talk about them all in a bit more detail. First stage that we're going to focus on is the planning stage. So we'll get into that. For the planning stage, the point of the planning stage is really to understand exactly what you would like to move. Sometimes this can be a very cumbersome process, and Movebot has a few tricks up its sleeve to sort of make that nice and easy for you. So kind of important things to note here is, despite our name, we actually only copy the data that you're moving. It's not actually deleting or removing content from the source. That all stays intact. Unfortunately, Copybot just doesn't quite have the same ring to it as Movebot. So just a heads up for anyone that's not familiar with that. One of the things that Movebot provides that makes this planning stage a lot simpler is our discovery scan. For anyone that's tried doing a migration either manually or with other tools, either free or paid for, you may have encountered situations where it's very difficult to identify, especially in the cloud space, exactly how much content you have to move. That includes things like how it's distributed, how many files, how many folders, who the biggest users are, how old content is, all this sort of information. Especially in the cloud these days, vendors are kind of incentivized to hide that information from you. The cloud has brought in this age of, we can just store everything and there's no need to get rid of it. And so sometimes, they present information in a way that doesn't make it exactly clear quite how much data you have. Using the discovery scan is a really great way to demystify that. and get a really good understanding of exactly how much you have in terms of real data, how it's distributed, and lets you easily identify stuff that you would like to move. Once you've got your discovery scan and you actually have a little bit of a lay of the land and you can see, okay, here's how the data is distributed across these various locations, then it's kind of a conversation of, okay, here's what we have in the source. What would we like things to look like in the destination? Is this structure that we have in our source environment going to be suitable for the destination? Are there any limitations to be aware of? Movebot's discovery scan will do a great job of sort of bringing any of those things to your attention. And, items you may need to consider sort of vary on the different destinations you may be moving into. So this is a great time to review that structure and determine if there's actually anything that needs to be restructured as part of this migration. That structural component for your file and folder structure also kind of applies to your permission structure as well. Oftentimes, when you're performing these migrations, you will be needing to bring over your permissions. So Movebot can bring these permissions over. We do this very frequently with a lot of our clients. But it's important to note that not all of the various systems have exactly the same permission options. These can vary depending on the platform that you're working with. And so if I was personally performing a migration, I would be taking the time to review the source permissions and then applying permissions to the destination using the best practices of the platform that I'm moving to. The benefit of that is it gives you a great chance to review permissions, ensure that there's no one who has access that shouldn't, and gives you a nice clean permission structure to work with in the destination. Understanding all of this information at the start and having visibility over all of that is a really great way to ensure your success when running these migrations. Cool. Oh, whoops. So once you have sort of got a bit of a lay of the land and you know where your data is located and how it's distributed, you can then start thinking about how you're actually going to move that data. This is where you would really get into your POC. We would really recommend that you execute essentially a full migration with individual users and or shared data if you're working with company-owned data as well. And it's a great time to push all of that through and actually check with the user that you've selected. Hey, can you please log into the destination and have a look? Can you make sure that everything is structured as you would expect? It's fascinating how many times people will run a migration with no visibility over the destination and just sort of take a spray and pray approach where they run everything and just hope for the best. It's really crucial that you have users, log in, perform some quick checks, and make sure. There's not really a whole lot you can do as an administrator to guarantee that those users are going to have everything that they need. From an administrative perspective, it's always a lot easier to have a user log in and confirm from their perspective because they know best what everything needs to look like. That POC is really crucial and will ensure, again, that you have a lot more ease when you come into your later stages of the migration. So throughout those phases, you may have, your proof of concept and, potentially a main phase. And then you may opt to migrate either by department or other breakdowns for your file systems as well. We're going to talk a little bit more about those phases. Maddy's going to get into the details on the mail side, and we'll provide some information on how you can best structure those various phases throughout your migration. Obviously, just on the permissions as well, from that discovery stage, you need to determine if you want to move them or grant them at the destination. Obviously, our recommendation is that you take the time to review the permissions and re-permission on the destination using the best practices for that platform. So we have a quick poll here that we just wanted to throw out there and just get a bit of a gauge with regards to the proof of concepts, whether or not you are using POCs at the moment, and what those might look like. So I think we can throw a wee poll up in the chat here, and people should be able to submit that there.
Getting some votes in. See what the winner is right now. Right now there's a spread.
Yeah, I suspect it's probably 50-50 on that one with most people, between sometimes and yes. I think a lot of people have in their head that this the POC side of things can be a bit cumbersome or difficult to actually verify. But Maddy, I know you've got some stuff later on to sort of help people understand the best way to structure those deployments and ensure that it's not such a headache.
So right now we're looking at the majority. We have yes. We've got a few on sometimes and a few on no. So interesting to see here. I'm curious what you'll do after seeing our webinar today going forward.
Yeah, hopefully we can switch a few of those no's to yeses. And nice. Cool. Ready to move forward then, I think.
Yeah. All right, so once you have your plan in place, you know what data you're going to move, how you want to move it, kind of have that all planned out, you get to start moving data. So there's a few different options in Movebot when you're moving data, but you always want to start with a full migration. What that full migration will do is scan your data, go ahead and push that over to the destination. Once that's through, you may see some failures. This is pretty normal. It really depends on what system you're migrating from. I've personally done a lot of migrations off of file systems. And one thing I see sometimes is users doing some crazy naming, creating file paths that are way too long for us to move. People will decide to name a folder, do not touch this after August 19th, 1998, and that just puts them over the limit. So errors aren't necessarily scary. We're just showing you what's in there, and then you can remediate it that way. So after that full migration, you'll have an idea of anything like that sticking out, and you'll be able to resolve it. Anything that's a lower medium error you might see in the discovery scan, sometimes that has to do with translation. So different systems allow different file characters, and we have it automated within Movebot that those will be translated, but in a scan, you'd see little medium or low severity error. Those are automatically fixed when you run a migration. So if you see one of those in the scan or in an initial migration, we always recommend running a delta, and that should resolve the errors. Once you've run your delta, if you had anything to fix, everything should look all good. If anything came up again, maybe a user's doing something funny with those folder names again, then you'd have the opportunity to reach out to them and say, hey, please don't do that, so you can get in a state where you are ready for your cutover. So my typical method is I'd run that full migration, triage any errors, run a delta, make sure it looks good. And if everything's good on that delta, I'll have an idea of how long that migration delta will take for the go live. If there's a couple more things I need to triage, I'll take care of that. And I typically like to run a delta about a week or a few days before my go live. That way I can plan, hey, this is going to take an hour, or this is a big chunky structure. I'm going to take 3-4 hours for this delta to run. And that allows me to plan if it's something I can cut over midday, or if it's maybe something we want to wait till the weekend to do a cutover for. If you can go ahead and
Maddy,
pop to the next slide. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, sorry, Maddy. I just wanted to note, there may be a few users in here who are potentially unfamiliar with our Delta process. Do you just want to touch on that quickly? Might be helpful for anyone viewing it at a later date.
Yeah, absolutely. So how a Delta will work is it's going to run a scan, and then it will check for anything on the destination side that exists. If it sees it already exists and the source has not been updated, it won't move the file. If it sees that the file's been changed on the source, then it will go ahead and update that file on the destination to reflect the source. That means that your users can keep working in the source while you run the migration. There's no need to stop work. You can be running this migration, running your deltas while people are doing their normal tasks. They wouldn't have to stop or switch to the new system until you have your cutover.
Fantastic. Cheers, Maddy. I know there's a number of people who come through, and yeah, definitely that legacy approach of getting it all done in one weekend is is pretty prominent sometimes. And I think yeah, maybe we can do a little bit more of a deep dive on the deltas and sort of best practices there, and how to ensure that structure is serving you best in future as well.
So I'm going to touch on two different types of cutovers here because the data that you're migrating varies in between file systems like Box, Dropbox, Ignite, Google, or Microsoft from doing a mail migration of mail data. So when you're migrating a file system, it's up to you how you want to do your cutover. You can either do one main group. So if you have maybe a smaller environment, not that much data to move, your proof of concept went great, and you just want to move over to the other system, that would definitely be a suitable option. The other option is if you have a larger environment, maybe you want to roll this out more slowly, is to phase that out. That could be department by department based. It could be by different buildings if you have a really large organization and have different physical locations that you're migrating to a new system. It's really up to you and your personal preferences. There's no right or wrong there. But running the initial migration, getting those deltas, and figuring out how long those go lives will take will give you a good estimation and good piece of information to choose how you want to roll this out. When you're doing your final cutover or go live, it is an option to remove access from users on the source. My experience working with users is you can tell them something a lot of times via email, via meeting communication, carrier pigeon, pick your poison there. They might still not listen. So personally, when I run migrations, I like to remove access for the source users. The services do need to stay up and running. So say if you're migrating OneDrive or Google Drive, the user would still need to be active. So one option to kind of remove access to those users would be to reset their passwords. In other situations, you might leave access. Just make sure it's clear to your users that after this certain time and date, when you're starting a Delta, if they make any changes to the source, those won't be brought over to the destination. At that point, you're ready to run your final Delta. And then if you chose from the earlier planning options that you did not move permissions with Movebot, you would want to grant them at the end of that Delta. Once that's finished, that will give all of your users access on the destination. So email's a little bit different, and there will always be different situations even with email. What I'm going to talk about today is doing a generic, I'm going from system A to system B, cutover and mail. So when you're doing mail migrations, I still highly recommend that you do a proof of concept just with a test user. But unlike file systems where you could potentially take your proof of concept live, you won't be able to do that with mail because the MX records will point to that source system still for mail flow. So for mail, you want to plan to cut all users at once in most situations. Make sure when you're planning for your cutover that the users have access to the destination system. The last thing you want when you're cutting over mail systems is a bunch of people who cannot get their mail, don't know how to get into the system. So you can definitely let those users access the destination system prior to the cutover. Sending out typically works, but just no inbound mail would be going there. So there's very low to no risk of getting those users in a week or so prior to that cutover. Once you're ready to transition, you go ahead and change your MX records. And again, you can optionally remove access on the source and then go and run your recent Delta. Once that's complete, you're all set. But really, as soon as those MX records change, your users are live. They'll be receiving email in the new system and they're ready to rock and roll. Hop to the next slide, Chris. So just a little recap here of what should that overall project plan look like. So you'll start out with your planning, running some scans, determining your content, deciding how you want to handle permissions, potentially change management for your users. A lot of the systems nowadays I find to be pretty straightforward. They have similar functions, but only you or your client knows the user base you're working with. So that's always a question to ask, when you're planning a project. Do people have any hesitations about this migration? Do people want training? Sometimes it will be absolutely yes. Other times the answer will be like, nope, we're good. We're not really worried about it at all. Once you have that plan in place, then you'll be able to run your full migration, go through any errors if those pop up, and then run at least one Delta prior to your cutover. For your cutover, optionally, you can remove access, run that final Delta. Like we talked about with mail, you'll change your mail flow through your MX records. And then if you did not move permissions in the migration process, you'd be able to move those, grant those on the destination. That's what we have for today. I see we have a couple questions in, but feel free to use that Q&A option there, and we'll address questions here. So one from Patrick. If there's a user that has files, shared files, or files shared with people, and their name is entirely different between the system migration from the source to destination, you can handle that in Movebot in the permission steps. So we have an option when you're setting up your project settings that you can define a permission mapping. So this is pretty common that maybe I'm M. Feliciano on the source and I'm Maddy on the destination. So you'd upload a CSV of any users, groups, aliases that might be changing during the migration into Movebot. And when you run that permission migration, then it will come across using that translation that you've added.
These translations are really helpful for those on-prem to cloud migrations. If you're bringing permissions over in that scenario, you'll have your pre-Windows 2000 username as the source, and you would want to obviously have that append your email suffix for most cloud destinations. Another useful thing with the permission translation is if you're doing, domain A to domain B, you can very simply translate just with a star at domain A to star at domain B on the permission migrations.
And then I saw another question on what happens if content is shared with a user originally and they change their name, like maybe they got married. And so their name changed in the system. It depends on the system. I can speak to Google specifically. If a username is changed in Google, and so it's shared to Maddy and now I'm Maddy Feliciano my name's been updated, that share is associated with the background account ID and not with my actual name. So in Google, doesn't matter where the share was sent to, as long as that user is still the same, it's good to go. What Movebot has is reporting on all the transfers you're running as well as the project you're running. So once you run your scans, in the report section of Movebot, you can see both a permissions report and a applied permissions report. So you could download the permissions report, see everything that user has shared to them, and then once you've run the migration, you'd be able to see all of those applied permissions as well. that can be useful when troubleshooting. Just, someone might have access to something, but maybe they're using two accounts, maybe they're doing something a little bit strange in the source, and that's why they don't see it in the destination.
I see there's one here regarding the 260 character limit from I'm assuming an on-prem environment. So when you're coming from on-premise environments, if you have path links that exceed the 260 characters, our Movebot agent, which will be running on the on-premise server, can automatically accommodate that, and it will bring those files across without issues. Obviously, if you're moving to an on-premise environment, you will need to ensure that the paths you're moving to the destination are compliant with that limit.
And I see another one here. Sorry.
You're good.
With an email delta, does it remove emails from the destination inbox, which the user has filed to another folder? No, it does not. So when we're pushing data over with email, it is created and would be created in the state when you first run that migration. So if a user's moving things around, that would not be reflected in the destination. So if you're having to run a migration kind of over a long period of time, you might want to let users know not to go through a big spring cleaning restructure. But I've personally had that go both ways for me. If you let them know, some people might suddenly feel inspired because they hadn't even thought about spring cleaning their inbox, and now they're going to go and do exactly what you told them not to. Where in other cases, it does work. People listen and stick to things there. At the end of the day, the data is moved over. You've ensured the data is moved over. It will be up to the user. Do they want to do a big reorganization? Does it bother them a lot or not? That's personal preference there. We will be sharing. Sorry, go ahead.
I was muted. I apologize. So 260 character limit with regards to Dropbox. There's no sort of special configuration required there. Dropbox has a recommendation of keeping the path below 260, but that is primarily to ensure that you're not going to hit any limits when synchronizing content down to your Windows PC. There's not actually a hard limit on Dropbox in terms of character count, so you can have a 260 characters path there. That's fine. Cool. And then there was one you were going to answer there as well, Maddy.
There's one question around, is our email migration in beta? Yes, it is still in beta, but it is working great. Many people are using it successfully for their mail migrations. We will move it out of beta at some point. We just want to make sure everything's working fantastic for everyone. And we're adding features as we speak to improve it even more, but it's in production, it works well. And overall, we're getting great feedback on it.
Yeah, we just recently released support for the EWS API on the Microsoft side. People that have run mail migrations previously may have encountered some limitations on the calendar front. So we have recently released support for the soon-to-be deprecated EWS API, and that will provide some useful support for the coming period while people are working with calendar migrations going into Microsoft in particular. So some great improvements there on the Microsoft side for the calendars. Really love to kind of hear how people are going on that front. If people are running mail migrations, any feedback you have would be really appreciated. We are making pretty constant updates and improvements to that part of the platform. So any feedback you have is fantastic.
And Joey, you asked one of my favorite questions. You're doing a few Google to Google migrations. Any tips on subdomain use and that type of migration? So With Google to Google, you can only have, and this is true for Microsoft to Microsoft as well, you can only have your domain name in one tenant at a time. So what you have to do is essentially create a placeholder. I usually create the placeholder on the destination as something like temp.thedomain.com. Move the data over historically following the process I just described here. For the cutover, what I would typically do is run that final delta. Once everything gets over, then you get to play domain name musical chairs. So in the source, you'd also want to set up a temporary domain name to rename all your users to, especially if they're coming out, maybe a divestiture of the environment. So you could put something like archive.yourdomain.com in the source, and then you'd have temp.yourdomain.com in the destination. So on that go live, you'd go ahead and rename all your source email addresses to get rid of the use of the original domain. So if I was Maddy at domain.com, I'd become Maddy at archive.domain.com. And that would free up the domain once it's removed from all users, groups, aliases in the source to be added to the destination, where then you can run a script or do manual renaming of the users to use that true domain name.
Cool. I see questions regarding file versions and deleting data in the destination. So just on basically, if someone has removed content from the destination during the migration, if you were to run a subsequent delta, the data that was removed would be copied over again, assuming that it's still present in the source. So that's one thing to keep in mind when you're sort of running migrations. If people have access to the destination, it is possible for them to make changes or adjustments that could cause issues there. And that can result in... Sorry, Maddy, I think there's a bit of feedback coming through your mic. Do you mind muting for a minute? Yeah, thank you. So yeah, if you have problems with or users in the destination, they can make adjustments there, which could result in data being copied over again. So it is important to note that yeah, if that data's been deleted, it would be recopied with a delta. Regarding the file versions, Movebot does support the migration of file versions. It's one of our least recommended features, basically. There's a number of limitations there just with regards to how versions work in these various cloud migration platforms. But yeah, there's no limit on how many we can move. There's just a number of sort of limitations to be aware of there. If there's a specific project you're considering that for, certainly reach out to our support and we can provide full details on that and sort of help ensure that you're able to achieve what you need to on that regard. Absolutely. It's really fantastic to see all of these questions coming through and a lot of engagement in the chat as well. Thank you everyone for attending today. Really appreciate it. If people do have questions or suggestions on things that they would like to see in upcoming webinars, feel free to drop them in the chat as well. We'd love to hear from you. Maddy and I will be looking to run a number of these over the coming few months, and yeah, just provide a lot of info for you all on this.
I saw one more question came in about migrating out of Google Drive. And with Movebot, if you're going, say, Google to Microsoft, what will happen with docs or sheets is they'll get translated into Microsoft file types. There is currently a limit on the API that limits the size of those. And we do not have the magical powers, unfortunately, to change that API itself. So that is a hard limit. And there's not anything changing on that we're aware of. But if we see anything in the future that we are able to move larger files and convert them from Google Doc types into Microsoft Doc types, we will absolutely make an announcement. You all will be the first to know. Chris, can you pop to the next slide we have? Just want to touch on one thing here. So you can reach us And we're happy to talk about specific projects, specific processes at support@movebot.io. You also, if you've used Movebot, might have noticed in the tool there's a little chat. Nowadays, everyone's talking about AI. We are not talking about AI. That chat goes to me and Chris and other support agents. I know when I see those pop up, I'm like, I don't want to talk to a bot. That's not going to help me with anything I have going on. Well, this is not a bot. It goes direct to us. So please, please reach out, and we are happy to help.
Wonderful. All right, then we might leave it there. Thank you again, everyone, for taking the time to jump on. I really appreciate it. We'll keep you in the loop with any upcoming webinars in the future. And yeah, as I mentioned before, if you have any suggestions or things that you'd really like to hear us speak with you about, do reach out via either our support or in the chat. We very much enjoy talking with you all. And yeah, until next time.